You're in sin. You're in it. It surrounds you. It's inside of you. So today I want to talk about freedom from sin. So this topic is kind of interesting to me because I've spent a lot of time, I've grown up as a Christian, I've been to a lot of sermons or services, I've been many denominations, different languages, different, just all kinds. And I even went all over the internet looking at sermons, and what I found is that I've never heard a sermon about freedom from sin. Nobody even mentions it. And for me, it's weird because it's written in the Bible. And it's really clearly written that whoever is born of God is freed from sin. And there's really no arguing this point, so I'd like to just read a few places where it talks about this. The first place is the Gospel of John, chapter 8, starting at verse 31 through 36. And here, at verse 32, Jesus says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And then the Jews kind of were confused. They don't know, what are you talking about? We were never slaves. What kind of freedom are you talking about? And then Jesus says, "You will be made free. Most assuredly, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed." So this is words saying that you're a slave, and you're a slave because you sin, and you're a slave to sin. And he says, I'll free you from that. In really clear terms, he says, I will free you from sin. That's what he came to do. And there's another place in Romans chapter 6. It kind of talks about the same thing, even more clearly. Written in, Romans chapter 6, verse 22. "But now, having been set free from sin, and having become slaves of God, you have your fruit of holiness, and the end, everlasting life." So from these two verses, it's really obviously clear that if you're born from God, you are free from sin. That's what the Bible teaches. So why haven't I ever heard a sermon about this in mainstream Christianity? I've went everywhere. I've heard everything. Why have I never heard this emphasis on this topic? Because these are pretty important words. They're big words. We are free from sin. If you come to know God, you're free from sin. Why haven't I heard this? Why isn't there no understanding about this topic? Because the Christians I talk to, I ask them, "Are you free from sin?" And they don't have an explanation. They don't even. I say, "Are you free from sin?" They don't have an answer. They're uncomfortable. They don't understand what this means. And so for me, it was always strange. How can such an important topic that's so clearly written in the Bible, and no one has an understanding about it? Nobody has a testimony about it. Nobody has this real experience with these words. And so and I've always had a problem with that. And it came to the point where everybody had the opposite testimony. Everybody, you go to a sermon, you would talk to a Christian, and they'd be telling you, we're all sinners. We all have sinful natures. We're imperfect. We do our best, but we always fail. And that's their testimony. And you hear that every sermon, they're going to talk like this, no matter what. But where is the testimony that I am free from sin? When do you ever hear a pastor on the pulpit say, I am free from sin? Thank God that I'm free from sin. When do we hear this? Never. I have never heard it. So for me, it's kind of a strange thing. So I just want to talk about what the Bible means when it says we're free from sin, because I do have this testimony. In the church where I do go to, we do have this testimony. So I'd just like to talk about what it means when I say that I'm free from sin. And so I find the easiest way to explain this is with an image, kind of like a metaphor. And I imagine a swamp. And so this swamp, it signifies sin. And we're born in this swamp, every person. And the reason I think this is a good thing, a good metaphor, is because sin in the Bible is described as a place. You're in sin. You're in it. It surrounds you. It's inside of you. And that's how the Bible describes it, like you're in a swamp. And so that's how I picture it. So we're all born in this swamp. And it's not a good place. You know, you're like neck deep in this muck, in this dirt, and it smells bad, and there's bugs everywhere, and it's just like, it's a bad place. But everyone's born into it, and they don't know any different. And they think it's normal. They don't understand that all this all this dirt and all this, like, there's disease, and then the air is unclean, and it's like, it's harming you, it's making you sick, but no one really understands it. And so it all seems kind of normal to them. But there are a few people who kind of understand that they're in a swamp and it's a bad place, but there's nothing they can really do about it. They're in the swamp. And so these people in the swamp, I call them swampers. I know it sounds kind of silly, but it kind of goes with the whole sinner dynamic. If you're in the swamp, you're a swamper. And if you're in sin, you're a sinner. That's kind of the definition the Bible puts in. And so here we are. People are in the swamp. Some people recognize that they're in the swamp, and so they try to kind of deal with that fact. They kind of try to stand up straight, or, pick up their heads above the swamp, trying to get their heads clean, keep their shoulders clean, be as clean as much as possible, even though they're still in the swamp. And so they wipe off their faces, try to keep everything clean. But at the end, they've realized it's pointless because they're in a swamp. They're completely covered in this mud. And so that's how they live. And so Jesus came, and he's not from the swamp. He's from dry land. And this dry land is like a different world. It's a different kingdom. And this is the place where people were meant to be. That's where God meant us to be. And so Jesus came, and his point was to take people out of this swamp, to put them on dry land. And the fact is, he did everything for us, for any person to come up onto dry land out of the swamp. He's done everything. So all he does is he reaches out his hand, and all people need to do is to grab his hand and let him pull them out of the swamp, to pull them out of sin. And he does this, and we just have to accept it. We just have to grab onto the salvation. And we do this by faith. And we just grab on, and he lifts us and pulls us out of the swamp. He lifts up out of sin. And so now that we're no longer in the swamp, we're no longer swampers, we're no longer sinners because we're not in sin. And so now what happens now? We're standing on dry land. Everything's different. Everything feels different. Like your whole life has changed. Everything that you experienced in the past, it's completely different. It's like you're standing on solid ground. Your eyes are finally open to what real life is. You realize in the past that wasn't real life. But the interesting thing is that you're freed from that swamp. You're freed from sin, but you look down and there's still mud. Your clothes are still covered in mud. There's still a little dirt here and there, and you're standing there. And that's true, you still have some mud. But the fact is, you're not in the swamp. And now it's Jesus' job to cleanse you. And that's what he does. He helps you out. He comes and he starts cleaning you. He starts taking off this bit of clothes. He puts on a new. He cleans this, he cleans that. And that's what the Bible calls sanctification. And so sanctification only can occur when you're out of that swamp, when you're out of sin, when sin doesn't have any power over you, when the source of sin itself is completely taken away. And now you come up out of that state, and now here Jesus could actually clean you. And when he cleans you, it stays clean because the swamp, the source of that dirt, is gone. And so he cleans you and it stays clean. And so you don't experience this life of a cycle where you feel like you're doing good, but then you fall back. And then it's just this big cycle of doing wrong and asking for forgiveness. But in God, on dry land, out of the swamp, once you're clean, you stay clean. And that's God's job. That's what Christ is doing. He cleanses you. It's written that that's God's will, is for you to cleanse yourself. It's for you to be sanctified. And Christ does this. And so that's what it means to be freed from sin. It's to be outside of sin, to be outside of its power. And another interesting thing is that it's written in 1 John. Chapter 3, verse 9. It's written even in a more clear, simple language. Whoever has been born of God does not sin, for his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin because he has been born of God. And in the same chapter, chapter 5, verse 18, he says a similar thing. We know that whoever is born of God does not sin, but he who has been born of God keeps himself, and the wicked one does not touch him. So how do we understand this? Okay, we're freed from sin. We're no longer sinners. We're outside of sin. We're in kind of God's territory on dry land. But we still have dirt, and we still need to be cleansed. But here, John says that we do not sin. So how do we understand this? So what it turns out to be is that on dry land, there is no law. There's no such thing as condemnation. There's no such thing as judgment. You're in God's hands, and everything that happens to you is God's will. And so it's God's will is to cleanse you. It is to make you clean. That is God's will. So for this dirt that is still on you, God does not judge you. He does not condemn you. And in this, you don't feel the guilt of sin. It is not there. On dry land, there is no law. There is nothing to judge you. Everything that is happening towards you and with you is according to God's will. So in this state, on dry land, you are freed from sin. You're freed from the source of sin. And you're on dry land, and Christ cleanses you. And God has no judgment that you need Jesus to do this for you. There's no condemnation for this. And so that's what it means to be freed from sin. But there's another really important idea to understand, is that the Bible is for sincere people. You could say that I'm born from God, and then I'm free from the law, and then you go and you start doing whatever you want. And the Bible speaks about this really clearly. It says, don't use your liberty as an excuse to do evil. And what that means is that if you're not sincere, you're not born of God. If you have this kind of understanding, well, I'm born of God, I'm free from the law, I'll do whatever I want. It's just sanctification. So this shows an insincere heart. And the Bible doesn't work with insincere people. So the Bible is meant for sincere people who honestly see that they're in the swamp and they sincerely want to get out of it. And then Christ is there to take you out of it. And then he puts you on dry land, and then you experience freedom from sin, and then you experience sanctification, and you feel and experience what John talks about when it says you do not sin, because the wicked one does not have a seed in you. You experience that. You experience this freedom, and you experience this sanctification where when Jesus cleanses you of something, it stays clean. And in this, there is no judgment. In this, there is no sin. And so you're not a sinner. And you say, and you testify, I do not sin because I'm born from God. And it all comes full circle because you're actually testifying and experiencing what it is written in the Bible. That we're freed from sin, that we don't sin, and that we're holy and we're righteous. And all of this happens because of what Christ did, because of where we are, because of the state that we are in, that we're in Christ, and that we're in God. And so this is the word that I don't see in the world today. I don't see this in modern Christianity. For me, it shows that something's wrong.